So as the principal investigator or PI of a clinical trial, it's ultimately my responsibility to run and coordinate the trial, to ensure that the patients on the trial are being treated appropriately, to ensure that the data is of good quality, and to essentially oversee the whole trial process.
I tend to be involved with several lymphoma studies at the same time. They can often be very different. Some studies will be quality of life studies in which patients will just fill out questionnaires. Other studies will be studies just taking a blood test or for the tumour samples to be analysed for certain genetic markers. More commonly, I'll be running studies which are introducing new drugs into treatment. And more recently, we've opened some studies using genetically engineered T cells to see if they can treat people's lymphoma.
You may be approached by a university sponsor or a pharmaceutical company to ask us whether we would participate in a clinical trial. Often this involves the sponsor looking at confirming that the geographical distribution is appropriate, so that for a common disease there's access to clinical trial in every city. In some situations it may be that for a rare disease that a specialist centre where patients are referred in for that rare disease, that would be the most appropriate place for a clinical trial.
As individual consultants, we'll look at the study and gauge whether we think it would be of benefit to our patients potentially, or of academic interest. And then if we felt that it was, we would discuss it with our colleagues and look at our portfolio of studies we have in that disease area already.
Within the UK, we're lucky. We have a really strong network of lymphoma clinicians who get together several times a year at national and international meetings, and we all discuss who's got which trials running. And that's really useful also for deciding when we've got a patient with us in clinic who may be in a difficult situation. Maybe we don't have a trial running, but through those networks we've established, we might know that one of our colleagues in Oxford or Manchester or one of the other leading centres might have a trial that benefits our patient, and we're all happy to refer our patients to one of those other centres if we know that somebody else is running one of these trials.
I would see a patient before they start on a clinical trial, so that I'm confident that a patient understands what being involved in a trial, and also that I'm confident that the patient is happy to participate in a trial. Thereafter, I see patients often at very clear planned clinic visits or on the ward, but also we sometimes see patients if there's potentially new side effects. So we see patients in an unplanned way, but see people promptly.
A data manager helps to put together a trial patient's clinical story from their medical history all the way through their trial treatment. As part of the trial, we often collect extra blood samples. These are used to help to understand the effects of the drug on the body and how the drug works differently in different patients. So it's my job to process these samples in the lab and to make sure they're sent off to the sponsor for their analysis. So a patient will come in for a trial visit and the research nurse or trials practitioner will collect the data. So they will do observations like blood pressure, and they will ask if the patient's been feeling unwell. So it's really important that we communicate regularly with them to ensure that everything is run effectively. We regularly meet with the PI of the study so that they can review the data that we're using. We communicate regularly with the sponsor from setup through to the end of the trial. The sponsor is a pharmaceutical company or an academic institute that designs the trial and oversees the running of the trial from start to finish. We arrange that a member of the sponsor's team come to visit us regularly to check through the data that we're using and ensure that we are working to their requirements. We take phone calls from patients and pass on messages to the relevant clinical staff member. So we don't see patients regularly in clinic because that's the trial practitioner's or the research nurse's job. However, as part of our training, we observe in clinic, and this kind of gives us a better overall picture of the disease and the trial, and really gives the context to the data that we're inputting.
I look after patients on clinical trials, and I have a caseload of patients who I am their point of contact for during their treatment. During clinic visits, I collect data from patients, and this data is in the form of any observations that I take, blood pressures, heights, weights, things like that, and then I give them to the data manager. There's a detailed schedule of events for each trial that we stick to see the patient, to make sure they're closely monitored. If we feel a patient is struggling or deteriorating at any point during treatment, we would organise for them to be seen more regularly. Before a patient starts on the trial, I have to make sure they understand the schedule of events, when they're to have treatment, when they're to have clinic visits. It's also important to educate the patient on lifestyle changes that may happen, dietary changes, any medications that may be started or stopped, things they should do and shouldn't do during treatment. I also make sure the patient updates me during clinic visits if anything changes with their activities of daily living, and also make sure that I re-educate them on each visit. As a research team, we work very closely together. I work closely with the Clinical Trials Practitioners. We see patients together. Then when we're office-based, the admin staff and data managers to collect the data. We also work closely with the PIs and the sub-Is and the clinical nurse specialists. We have regular meetings throughout the week and throughout the month as a research team, but also as a wider multidisciplinary team.
I'll meet a new clinical trial patient at their first clinic visit about the clinical trial and help them to make a decision about whether the clinical trial is appropriate for them. I'll organise their screening visits and all of their tests while they're on the clinical trial and their treatment. I'll be their point of contact while they're on the clinical trial and make sure that they're comfortable while they're on the clinical trial. I'll also attract new research to the hospital and try to work out whether we can run new clinical trials and work with the study PI to make sure the trials are run correctly and to the schedule. Clinical trial practitioners have a science degree and often a master's degree. They'll often have worked in clinical trials in the past, often as a data manager, or have strong NHS experience. We are not nurses, but we are trained in clinical tasks and how to deal with patients in the same way that a healthcare assistant would. Our experience is different to that of a research nurse. We come from a strong research background, whereas a research nurse will be an experienced nurse who may have worked on the wards or in A&E. A clinical trial practitioner has a close working relationship with the research nurses and the data managers and the PI. Together we form the research team. With the PIs, we help them plan new trials, we help them manage patients on trials currently open, and patients in follow-up. We work with the PI and the sponsor of the trial to make sure that the trial is running smoothly and answer any queries the sponsor might have, or any queries that the patient might have about the trial.